Welcome to this edition of the High Strangeness Factor, copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I am your host, Steve Ward. And with me today, without any preamble, is Andy Mercer. Andy, welcome back to the show.
Hello, how you doing?
This is, I don't know that we always do two shows together in a row, but everything can happen on this show. And I want to point out that you are the co-creator, co-host, and producer of the High Strangeness Factor. Before we get started, was there anything you wanted to talk about or promote or anything before we get off and running? Okay,
yes,
go ahead.
I do indeed, yes.
All right.
Next book is going to be out very soon, or the next few weeks actually. It's we're just finalising all the details at the moment. My book on the esoteric elements of Dante's Inferno that I've been going on about the last few times we've done shows together. It's we're working with the publisher at the moment, going for the proofs. So hopefully within the next few weeks it'll be out, and I can let you know where you can get it. It'll be available mainly online rather than in actual bookshops at the moment. It's only a short print run of something I worked on earlier this year, but it's the esoteric elements of Dante's Inferno, which I'm really looking forward to getting out there. So, yes, I thought I'd just give a quick promotion for that.
That sounds a little more highbrow than the Shaver mystery.
Well, I don't know. You know, the mystery itself is a complexity, a multi-layered, multifaceted weirdness. So, no, it's quite a strange story.
And they both deal with, I think, the regions under the earth.
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, the Inferno, of course, is Dante's exploration of hell. It really it's a foundational document, if you like, of sort of the Christian idea of what hell is actually supposed to be like. It was fleshed out, as it were, by Dante back in the 1200s. So it's an important book in itself. And it's just my little take on certain elements of it that are perhaps more esoteric, occult-based than are obvious at first glance, but it's something that I've always been fascinated by. I absolutely love the story. But yeah, our Schaefer mystery last time round, it's left me kind of a bit bamboozled, and I did a lot of research after just to try and make head nor tail of it. But I mean, we could put the whole thing down to just pure imagination, but it would still be a pretty damn good imagination, I have to say. Yeah, but it was very strange.
It would, and it sold thousands of magazines in the 1940s. Also, I want to direct people to the past episodes of the High Strangeness Factor. Recently, you have done a couple of fill-ins for me. The last one, a few weeks ago, was on voodoo.
Yes. Okay.
And to go back, you did one that had a lot of hits called on the Dyatlov mystery in Russia.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And also talk a little bit about your dark ambient music composition.
Oh, yes.
Where people can hear it.
Yes, I've been trying to produce one a month, which is a mix of other artists' material put together, and I'm a bit behind, actually, not one since August, so I need to get a new one out soon. But I'm also working on my own material, which I'm launching my own channel called The Infinite Regress fairly soon, which will have my own dark ambient music on, which you can download and have a listen to. So that's kind of keep me busy, but that's all been put on the back burner until I get this book finished. So.
And I have a little thing to promote, but I'll talk about it at the end of the show. And,
we must do it now. Absolutely.
Okay. There's everybody knows who Seth Breedlove is at the Small Town Monsters Productions, very quality productions. Well, he's done a sequel to the Mothman of Point Pleasant called The Mothman Legacy. Well, he interviewed me for that. So somebody likes it. I can hear in the background there. Wow.
Sorry.
That's quite all right. It was perfectly timed. But I am one of the talking heads that you'll see spaced throughout the production, and talking about Mothman and John Keel and so forth. It was Seth Breedlove that interviewed me for about an hour, so you'll see a few snippets of that. And the only thing I will say about my performance is that the lighting was phenomenal. Okay. Now, before we introduce our three guests tonight, I just want to say that I have a friend of mine that I know from the Mothman Festival, and I saw him a couple of weeks ago, Jeff. He says that when he listens to the High Strangeness Factor, he counts the number of minutes to where I mentioned John Keel, whether or not the show has anything to do with John Keel or whatever the subject is. And he said it would make a great drinking game to take a swig every time Keel is mentioned. And of course, our friend Zelia Edgar, who's been on this show, would be the same way. So I want to warn people, if you happen to be playing that game tonight, you're going to be snockered in about 5 minutes. So you may want to pace yourself. Okay. All three hosts of the 6 Degrees of John Keel podcast are lifelong experiencers of paranormal phenomena. Kendra Maurer grew up in southern Ohio, and both Barbara Fisher and her daughter Morganna, did I get that right?
It's Morganna, but everybody gets it wrong.
Oh boy, Morganna grew up in West Virginia. All three have experienced a wide variety of manifestations of the other since early childhood. They all were inspired by the writings of John Keel to bring their experiences to the podcasting world as a way to show their audience that the weirdness is out there and that's okay. As Keel said, it is the normal condition on this planet. Ladies, welcome to the High Strangeness Factor.
Thanks for having us.
Oh my goodness, it was almost perfect.
Well, if you can get that dog to bark in certain strategic moments.
I'll try.
She pinched him. She pinched him. That's what happened.
All right. Okay. I guess where I'll start is that when I saw you guys kind of promoted your podcast early on, telling us when the first episode was going to be. Now, the first episode is out, if that's correct, but there's maybe 2 more in the can?
Yes.
Okay. And it's called The 6 Degrees of John Keel. And where can people find that?
It's currently available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher, or you can go to 6degreesofjohnkeel.com. And if you go there, it's really, really cool because we also have a blog, so you can read what our thoughts are in addition to hear us.
And I think you can find the link on Facebook as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We have a Facebook page too. So.
And this is Barbara I'm talking to?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. All right. So what? Now, I have, as anybody knows that's listened to this podcast, I've been a huge fan of John Keel since the 60s, and without going over too much of what I've talked about 1,000 times on the show, it was the Operation Trojan Horse that really changed my thinking on the paranormal. Which I read well before the Mothman prophecies. What spurred you guys on to do a podcast that has sort of John Keel as a central theme?
You want me to answer it?
Anybody.
For it. Okay, I'll go for it. Okay. And then y'all can jump in.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So I read John Keel when I was 11 years old. That's when the Mothman Prophecies came out as a book. And I remember the Silver Bridge collapsing. It was probably the first really big media event. I remember I heard it on the radio. I saw it on television. My mother was crying, so it's all been part of my life growing up in West Virginia.
Can you tell us what part of West Virginia you were in when you heard about the bridge collapsing?
I was in Charleston.
That's pretty close.
Yeah, I grew up in Charleston, and then on weekends, we spent the weekends with my grandparents in Putnam County. So that's actually their farm is pretty much halfway between Charleston and Point Pleasant. So we all knew about Mothman. We watched for UFOs at night out at my grandparents' farm. Everybody knew about all of that, and it was very, very devastating, even in the capital city. We weren't right there when it happened, obviously, but the whole state, the flags went at half-mast, and everybody talked about it everywhere you went. Did you hear about, my cousin was one of the people on the bridge, or, my neighbor has a nephew, or, whatever. Somebody knew somebody that it touched. And it was really, really sad. And so I kind of grew up in the shadow of that bridge, even though I was not from Point Pleasant. And, of course, my father very helpfully told me, we crossed that bridge last year. Gee, thanks, Dad.
Well,
thanks
it's funny.
for telling me that.
But I used to work for an electrical wholesaler, and at times I would make deliveries. And of course, I would wear one or more of my throughout the day, one or more of my 50 Mothman T-shirts. And people would oftentimes tell me the same thing. Well, we used to vacation there. We crossed that bridge 2 weeks before it collapsed. So it's it's such a central point in time. Ironically, I don't remember when the bridge collapsed. I remember in November '66 when the wire services covered the winged entity that chased the two couples down Route 62. But I was kind of primed for it because March before that, March '66, was the swamp gas era where Dr. Hynek made his name with the swamp gas. I got to meet him. I got to meet him 10 years later at the 1976 MUFON Symposium after he became one of the good guys and got rid of had left Project Blue Book and had started the Center for UFO Studies in Evanston, Illinois. By the way, before you go on, when you were watching for the UFOs on that farm, did you ever see any?
Oh yeah. My grandfather in particular, I didn't see this, but my grandfather, my grandmother, and my uncle saw it. They watched several really large balls of light travel over the big high tension, high voltage wires, the ones that go through rural areas. And in West Virginia, they're up on the ridge tops. And they had some that crossed the ridge top across from the ridge where their farm was. And they watched these big lights come down and travel, just above the wires, like a couple 100 feet. And they'd travel along them and then they'd zip away at high speed. So yeah, they saw that and they told us about that. And we saw all kinds of lights in the sky because, of course, it was way out in the country, and it was dark.
Well, I really envy that when I heard John Keel tell his stories about he and Mary Hyre and others on that hill down by Gallipolis Ferry. In fact, I think we actually found that hill. Now Keel was very careful about the way he would obscure certain places to keep people like me from going out snooping around. But two of my friends, John and Tim Frick, that they fly the Mothman during the Mothman hayride during the Mothman Festival, and they portray the Men in Black by day. But they contacted a lady that's mentioned in one of Jeff Wamsley's books. Of course, Jeff Wamsley, the co-creator of the Mothman Festival and the
museum.
The museum. He created the co-creator of the museum. He mentioned there's a lady in one of his books that kind of gives a hint. So they went and talked to her, and so we found it's if you go down to Gallipolis Ferry down Route 2 and follow the river, and then you go in on Crab Creek Road. And then you go down a few miles and you turn left on Horselick Road. And then I'm not going to go any further in case I'm going to have people trespassing. But you go down a ways, there's this dirt road that kind of goes up a hill, and part of it's wearing away. I mean, one night we went up there and we're backing up in this guy's van we call the Frickmobile, and good Lord, we almost would had a bad ending there. But anyway, it's possible. I think that's one of the areas that where they went up there to see this. Before we go on with that now. So was the Mothman Prophecies book, was that the first thing you had read by Keel?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
And what about the other ladies? What was your first introduction to John Keel, and how did you look at that? How did you process that?
Well, this is Kendra.
Okay.
So for me, back in the mid-90s, I was living in Zaleski State Forest, which is outside of Athens near Lake Hope State Park. Driving home one night, I saw a Mothman, and it was the single most terrifying event of my life. And
what can you pinpoint the time period? The year? Or?
It would have been...
Just roughly is fine.
It would have been early autumn. About September. Yeah, it was around September.
And but what year?
94. 94.
Okay.
94 or 95.
I think it was 94, but it may have been 95.
No, it's 94 because I was working at the CCC camp.
So
That's right.
So tell us your experience.
Do you want the whole story?
well, whatever you want. You can shorten it or however. I want to know what Mothman looked like.
Oh, so I'll just tell the whole story. So I had wrecked my car at one point in the state forest, and a housemate of mine from Athens was driving me in and out of the Civilian Conservation Corps camp so I could go to karate. And this was on a night that it was a Wednesday night, actually, and he was driving me home from karate. And we were just chatting in the car, as we often did. And at some point, as we're going, we had passed Lake Hope, and there's a fork in the road, and part of the road goes off into, gravel roads, which beyond that is Moonville, which is a ghost town. And then the right curve takes you up to the conservation camp. So as we're approaching this split, there's a yellow diamond-shaped sign with a curve on it. And as we're approaching, I can remember hearing myself saying his name, my friend's name, over and over, but it was like it was muffled. It's like hearing myself now with the earphones on where I don't quite hear myself clearly. And finally he said, "Yeah, I see it." And he skidded the car off to the right to head off into camp. And it was huge because it covered this yellow diamond sign. And it looks like a three-dimensional shadow with bright, deep red eyes. And it just, when you try to scream in a nightmare, that's what it feels like. Where it's an inescapable, you can't even call it fear, because when you say something makes you afraid, there's an implication that you can do something about it. But
was it the visual aspect about it that gave the reaction that you had, or was there something, I don't know, for lack of a better name, psychic or something internal that was triggered?
I think it's more than visual, because it was all encompassing. You see something that doesn't make sense, and your mind tries to arrange it to make sense of it before you really start reacting to it. But this was very much everything happened together. There was no, I see something, it makes me afraid. It was like all hands on deck with sensory reaction. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. And now let's see. Now, how do you ladies know each other? Did you know Barbara when you had your sighting?
Yes. Yeah, we had known each other for 2 or 3 years at that point.
And had you talked about things like John Keel? Did you know about the Mothman prior to that or anything?
I did. It wasn't, I don't know that she and I ever spoke specifically about Mothman, and it was nothing that really entered. It's not like I was a fan or I was really into that kind of thing. So it's not like it was something on the forefront or, that I'd be looking for. It just, I think I saw tabloids now and again, back in the early 90s when everything had Mothman on it, I guess. There's a fire. Look, he's in the smoke kind of thing.
Right. Well, yeah, there was that igloo that blew up.
Yes.
Remember,
right. Yes.
2011? That was the igloo I'm talking about. It's one of the places where they used to store dynamite for at the TNT area, just for people that don't know. And I was my friends John and Tim were down there that night. That thing blew its top, and they were even on that road, that same road.
Ooh,
but they weren't as far. Well, they weren't. They were. It's a long, funny story, but they had one of them had eaten too much greasy pizza. So they retired early. These guys are out into the TNT area like 2 a.m. So they retired early, went back to the Low Hotel, and the next morning Rush, the one of the proprietors, woke him up and said, "Guess what happened last night?" And we were looking at in the Mothman Museum, where it used to be across the street. We were looking at a video that somebody had taken from a different vantage point after this thing blew up, and you could see the flames going high into the air, and there was an image on this thing that looked like a shadowy Mothman, and even I looked at it and I thought, that's a little creepy, but they examined it and they found out it was just really an image that was on the windshield of the car, which was unfortunate. It wasn't a harbinger of doom. So, but we went down there the next week. And so I saw this thing after it blew its top and the iron doors were blown out. And I was just down there again a few weeks ago. So it's really looks pretty cool. It looks like the dome in the Time Machine, that the 1960s version with Rod Taylor. Yeah, it looks like you're off in the future and there are Morlocks hiding at the in the shadows. Okay, so actually you had an experience. I mean, a real experience with that, and you would definitely call it Mothman the way it looked, and not something else.
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead.
You didn't tell me about it when it happened because she wouldn't talk about it.
Yeah.
It was her friend who was driving the car who told me about it.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, you should ask Kendra about what we saw." I said, "Well, what did you see?" He said, "Well, you should ask Kendra."
Yeah.
But it had red eyes. And of course my brain goes, "Oh,
yeah,
it had red eyes."
And
so I said, "Hey, what did you see with Brian that night?" Well, you could tell the rest because you were having none of it.
I pretty much, I have it in my head that if you think about something and you talk about something, you're inviting it in. So at that point, I'm like, nothing. I saw nothing. I want nothing to do with nothing. Nothing happened. I'm going to go back to camp. I'm going to sleep under my bed and I'm going to be fine. So it wasn't till there was a show on the Sci-Fi Channel where they talked about Mothman. It was 15 years ago, maybe a little more. But I was watching it, and kind of they did this rendition that it threw me, and I just sat down because I'm watching, and I'm like, that really reminds me of what I saw. And I thought, well, but I was nowhere near Point Pleasant. There's no way it could possibly be that. And then the image they showed was the Athens Messenger, where it was first reported. I'm like, oh, come on. So after that, I started kind of embracing it a little bit and talking a little bit more about it. But it took a while for me to be okay with it.
Well, I can understand that.
Yeah.
And the third lady, whose name I keep murdering here.
It's okay. Seriously, nobody says it right, ever.
Well, say it one more time for me.
Morganna.
If you're English, it's a lot easier. Morganna is just rolls off the tongue.
Yes, that's good. I'm just going to refer to Andy every time. Either that, I'm going to resort to your pseudonym. So either way, okay. But for you, what was your path to come to this this podcast and to be starting to learn about John Keel's research?
Well, Barbara's my mother. And we come from an odd family where pretty much my entire family has seen something weird or has a story about weird stuff. And so I started seeing strange things really young. And at first I didn't talk about it a ton, like I did with my grandfather, but one set of grandparents lived in a very haunted house. And so that was normal to talk about there are ghosts in the house. They're like, oh yeah, you saw, the little old lady who lives in the attic. Don't worry. And then I started to get really curious about it around 10, 11, and 12. And my mom, I didn't realize you first read the Mothman Prophecies at 11. And now I'm like, maybe that's why you gave me that book as a young child.
Yes.
Which promptly gave me like both nightmares and this lifelong fascination.
So no Nancy Drew, just the terrifying reality of the Mothman. Okay.
No, she also read me Edgar Allan Poe when I was a baby.
Okay.
So
Oh my God.
Well, you didn't have a chance, kid. Okay.
I
so-
didn't.
Okay.
Tennyson too.
Yes, you did.
Tennyson.
read
Tennyson was nice.
okay,
I mean, until
okay.
the end. Idols of the King until he
Parts
died.
of Tennyson are nice.
Yeah. Until King Arthur gets stabbed, but other than that.
Well, I want
The
to
lady
say.
of Shalott dies in a boat.
Yeah, okay, that part's bad too.
Oh, yeah, well, it's all kinds of bad stuff in poetry, and that's why I try to stay away from it. And otherwise, the Daffodils, Wadsworth, they came out pretty well, I think. But okay, so now I want to tell everybody that they should listen to your first podcast. I don't know how much we'll get to, but you guys talked a lot about experiences you had, and of course, we won't be able to get all that tonight. Let's see, I've got a billion questions here. Is there anything so far that you would like to bring up that I haven't talked about yet?
Well, I think we could just tell you why we called it 6 Degrees of John Keel.
Yes, that's definitely. Let's go there.
Because, okay, so one of the things that John Keel says in it's the Guide to Mysterious Beings, Complete Guide of Mysterious Beings, is that somewhere within 200 miles of your house, there's someone who has seen a UFO or a ghost or a hairy monster. And sometime in your lifetime, somebody that you know is going to see something else. And that's the normal condition of the planet. That's just how things happen. It's not that unusual. And to us, that's like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, but weirder and cooler because it's 6 degrees of John Keel. So that's why we named it that.
And does it also, when I was exposed to UFOs, Operation Trojan Horse. By the way, have any of you ladies read Trojan Horse?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
I think we
Okay,
all
good.
have.
I've read everything. And
Oh,
I
good.
know
Yeah.
Mom has.
So have I. Yeah.
Well, I had a couple long conversations with Barbara via Messenger, and what spurred it was, and I won't get into any details, but there was a particular individual that attacked me on Facebook again. Now, I'm sure you've never heard of anybody attacking anybody on Facebook, but
No, that never happens.
and he's kind of connected to all this stuff. And I thought, boy, I hope these ladies know about this gentleman. And so we had a conversation about that. And of course, you guys were up to speed. But the one thing that Trojan Horse, when it hit me between the eyes was, that's when I first recognized the patterns and the parallels that are connected with all these things. And now, once I read, I told Barbara, once I recovered from Trojan Horse, then I read Vallet's Passport to Magonia.
Oh, and then you're just gone at that point.
That's
Your
right.
brain's just gone. You're like, oh my God.
And I have to tell you something funny. I was exposed, the Guide to Mysterious Beings used to be called Strange Creatures from Time and Space when it first came out. And I had read that, and Keel was kind of preparing us a little bit because he was talking about window areas. And I had even I saw Keel on TV once. It was the old UHF stations. We used to get these great talk shows out of New York. Well, this is back, late 60s, I guess. The Alan Burke show, he had Ivan Sanderson on, and it was the guest. And John Keel was in the audience, and he came up to talk. Do you know how they had the speakers even back then in those days? So a young, slender John Keel with his beard and a bit balding, and it was just really cool. A friend of mine met Keel too, but that's another story. So it was before Trojan Horse came out. I was talking with a friend of mine, and we had our, obligatory high school UFO club, and we were pretty much ET nuts and bolts, and we heard about this Trojan Horse, and we thought, what the heck is Keel trying to do? We might as well just give up the entire research if he's trying to, connect ghosts and all this stuff. So I was actually kind of bad-mouthing Keel a little bit before I read the book. So then once I read the book, you get pulled in. His arguments are sound. By the way, Andy, are you still there?
Oh yes, I'm very much here.
Good. Okay, chime in anytime. But I can't help but look at anything in the paranormal without automatically seeing patterns and parallels. For example, Barbara and I talked a little bit about elements of folklore. And of course, Keel talks about that. Valet gets really into that. And I think you guys were talking about Joe Symington on your first podcast a little bit.
Yeah.
And the cosmic pancakes from outer space.
Mhm.
Oh, yes. Yes. And how aliens obviously cannot cook.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
oh, sorry. And
Go
the
ahead.
lack of salt, which is frequently used to dispel spirits, but also even more interestingly in connecting to fairy lore, the Fae would give, fairy bread and fairy cakes and things that, of course, would dissolve into leaves, much like fairy gold would. But I just think it's interesting that it both doesn't have salt, which also, weirdly enough, a lot of UFO occupants that were mentioned in the Mothman prophecies were asking for salt.
Yes.
Yes. Salt tablets.
But not only did they not have salt, which tied into that, but it also does have a connection, even if it's a bit tenuous, to fairy lore. I just wish the pancakes had evaporated, and then it would have been a very, very, very strong connection with fairy lore.
Maybe the Earth is just a salt mine to the aliens.
Or a gold mine. That was another thing that Keel posited, was there was some weird thing that they had with gold.
Right. He talks, and I've just been. It's been a long time since I've read The Eighth Tower, but I'm listening to that on Audible again, and that's another. That of course, The Eighth Tower was half of the Mothman prophecies was cut out and left on the cutting room floor. So he salvaged at least 2/3 of that in the Eighth Tower. Also, there were some other things about Symington you might want to comment on. The description of the entities inside. They looked fairly human. They were about 5 feet tall, wearing coveralls. But he told the local judge, he said, well, they didn't look like little green men. They were kind of swarthy looking, like Italians.
Yes, short Italian men.
Yes.
I remember that.
And do you remember in Trojan Horse where I think he quotes General Spatz from World War II in some kind of a press conference he did in 1948, where he's talking about how there's no truth to the rumor that Spaniards are driving flying saucers.
Right.
Yes.
So,
yes,
go ahead.
There's a tradition in I think it's the Irish have the Dina She as opposed to the Lennon She or the plain old She or the Tuatha De Danann. But the Dina She are supposed to be about human size but short and slight, and they have nut brown skin.
Oh, that's right.
And they have long fingers and big eyes.
I need to reread Catherine Briggs.
Oh, yes. Catherine Briggs is right up there with Valet and Keel, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh.
Yes, and she talks about how the fairies could take on different sizes, because sometimes we're dealing with giants in silver suits, and we think, well, that can't be part of fairy lore, but actually it fits in very well. I don't know if you guys have ever read the Dubbed Enigma. It talks about in southwest Wales, there was a whole wave of landings with giants and there were a lot of connections with folklore and so forth there. But go ahead.
The fairies always said that we can make the big small and the small big.
Yes.
That's one of the things that they would say.
And then you have the aspect of the water. That
yes.
These guys, here they are. They're cooking pancakes on a flameless grill. You'd think that maybe they had, to save a little space, they'd have freeze-dried food and maybe Tang like the astronauts had, right? But instead they hand this guy a bucket or a chalice or something like that, and he gets water from the well. And of course, if you look at the UFO lore, there's many instances where different craft are seen sucking up water or putting hoses in the water, but
or
there's
coming out of water.
Coming out of water. But there's one you may not be aware of. I think it was at Flying Saucer Review, and Charles Bowen and the Humanoids talks about a case in the mid-50s in California. 2 miners are out there, and they've been seeing this strange craft in the sky for the past month. Well, at one point, this John Black, he's in the woods. He sees what he thinks is a young boy fishing, and they're standing by a river, and he gets a little closer, and it's not a young boy. It's some little little guy with a kind of a tunic with buckles and a tie. He's gathering water in a bucket. He walks out of the woods, and John Black stays back far enough that he doesn't disturb him. This guy walks across a clearing, walks up one of these craft that has landed, and takes his bucket of water inside the flying saucer. And this is almost 10 years before Joe Simonton had his encounter. So another, depending on the context, 100 or 200 years ago, they would have said, well, they had an encounter with the fairies, even though they're showing up in a strange metallic chariot.
During the airship flap, wasn't
I knew
that common too?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I've been reading about the airships lately.
I was thinking that.
Because the pilots would land at farms and ask for water, or they would run into them at mines, or sheep herders would run into them at mines. And then that whole sheep herder thing drags my brain to Missing 411 because I've been reading those too. And strange things. And then that ties my brain into boulder fields with the Scandinavian belief that elves and trolls live in boulders.
Oh, yeah.
And all of this is somehow connected. And then I start feeling like I should put a tinfoil hat on and calm down.
Yes. Well, even some of the silver-suited giants we're seeing coming out of these stacked rocks,
right?
Out of the water. So,
yep.
And who was it? Was it Evans Wentz, or was it the other guy that talked about how the quote that the rocks were full of them, referring to the fairies?
Yes.
That is actually, it's the
one
other who was it was the one who was a seer, not Robert Kirk, but the one from early in this century. But it came out around the same time as Evans Wentz, and it's on the tip of my tongue. And I'll think of it at 3 a.m, and I promise not to call you and tell you.
Oh, you can. I just won't answer.
I know the one you're talking about. I can't think of the name either.
I know. I can see it. It. If I was next to my bookcase, I could grab it.
Yeah, I know the one you're talking about. I've got it too somewhere, actually, as well.
But it's such a fascinating area. I must have 20 books now in fairy lore. So.
Yeah, I have lots, and I have a whole bookshelf, a whole, bookcase, actually, of fairy lore.
There's another excellent source called British Goblins.
Yes.
Yes, that's a good. I can't think of his name. Wirt, I think his first name is.
Wirt.
Yeah, Wirt somebody. Anyway,
Wirt Sykes.
Oh, Wirt Sykes. Okay, thank you. I want to tell everybody that you are listening to the High Strangeness Factor, copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I am Steve Ward. Andy Mercer and I are talking to Barbara, Kendra, and Morganna.
Morganna.
That's my new drinking game.
Oh, wait a minute. I know how to do this. Now. Yes. I got it now. Okay. The learning curve is tough, but it does work eventually.
Imagine this poor child growing up in West Virginia with that damn name.
I blame
wonder
you,
she
Mother.
still likes me.
I blame you.
The trouble is, you need the English accent to say it correctly. You've got to say it, Southern English accent to say it correctly.
It's an English or Welsh name.
Absolutely.
And I'm grateful that she didn't spell it the Welsh way, or no one would know what I was called.
3 D's, a T, and a Y.
Yeah.
I never do accents because they're so bad. It's always going to sound like I'm being disrespectful, and not funny. Let's see. I'm just going to jump around, and ladies, and Andy, just jump in anytime you want. I've got. I did want to ask you. You've all have seen the film, The Mothman Prophecies?
I have not.
I have not either.
And who just spoke? Wait. Who has not seen it?
Kendra.
And Morganna.
Okay. Okay, really? Okay,
I don't know why I've never seen it.
Same here.
Well, so Barbara, what was your impression? What was your initial impression, and does it still hold?
My first impression on watching it was very fascinating to see John Keel split into two people, because the main character played by Richard Gere is obviously supposed to be John Keel. He's from New York. He's a journalist. He's comes into this small town and there's a mystery. But then he also goes and visits this researcher named Leek, And Leek is played by one of my favorite character actors, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And that was interesting. I was like, wow, they just split him into two. Fascinating.
Yes.
Spelled his name backwards.
And spelled his name backwards, because that's not, obvious. My favorite part was when Keel's, or the Gear character, was in the hotel room, and Indrid Cold calls him.
Yes.
And tells him about the chapstick in his pocket or on his dresser or whatever. And he hangs up the phone in terror. And that, you describe it, it sounds stupid. It sounds absolutely 100% like, duh, that's dumb. That's not scary. But it is. Actually, it is very, very scary. And it reminded me, it was the only part of the movie that I found to be frightening. And it caught that perfectly, that kind of weird feeling that things were not right and something was watching you. And it brought to mind a thing that happens with me when I read John Keel's books.
Oh, the phone calls?
The phone calls. And it's not just us. It's not just us who get weird phone calls when we read John Keel. I thought it was me. And that's been happening since I was a kid. I get hang-up calls all the time.
Yeah.
It's very weird.
Same.
Very, very weird.
That's really interesting.
I have a friend in Britain, and she finally started reading something other than Mothman. She'd only read Mothman, and she decided to read, because I told her The Eighth Tower was my favorite. And so she decided to read it. And she came on Facebook and said, hey, does anybody else have this problem with John Keel? You read the book and then you start getting stupid phone calls, dead air on the, there's somebody there, but you can't hear them, or they just hang up, or there's dead air on it. And I was like, yeah. And then a bunch of other people that I had never discussed it with were like, oh yeah. So yeah.
That's happened with Nick Redfern as well, even when he's been on shows. If he talks about Men in Black or Black-Eyed Children, and the same thing with David Weatherly, people reading his book on Black-Eyed Children will have weird things happen, lights will flicker, phone calls, and so forth. So there's really something going on there. Redfern documents a lot of that in his book called Black Diary. And he also says some very good things about John Keel there, which he praises John Keel.
But Steve,
what's that?
Why has it never happened to you?
Well, because I think I told Barbara briefly in our conversation that the only thing that happened to me that was really weird was the night I decided to go out into the TNT area alone one night. My friends had gone home. And,
I know, right?
Oh my God.
And it was well, see, it's the locals go out there and they fish and they get camp and everything. It's no big deal. But for somebody that doesn't live there and has all the mythos of the Mothman and all I've spoken to about 6 of the original witnesses. So there's something happened there. So all I did is walk in. I'm playing paranormal investigator. I've got my flashlight. I've got my recorder duct taped to it. I've got my camera. I didn't have my night vision goggles back then. And it was loud because it was end of May, and the frogs and the bugs and everything it was almost deafening. So I walked into one of the igloos and very bravely I looked around. Oh, good. Another perfectly timed bark there.
He's like, don't do that.
Yes, I know.
So
like Lassie's warning me, don't go in the well. Okay. So
he's
and then
very good about it.
I drove back on Route 62, and I experienced a couple flashes of light, like a strobe, like a flash, and then another one. I don't know where it came from. And I stupidly didn't think about, well, where am I along the road that I can come back the next day? I did everything wrong. Anyway, to cut the story short, I went back to my motel across the river in Gallipolis. I opened the door, and the TV set turned on and started flipping through channels steadily. And I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking, pardon me, but this shit doesn't happen to me, okay? So I did what any intrepid, inquisitive paranormal investigator would have done, and I unplugged the damn TV set and went to bed. So,
right?
But then the next year, I'm in with a couple of my buddies, John and Tim. We're crammed in a room next to that one. The TV set turned on that night. The next day, two of us went into that same room. The TV set turned on. It's one of the older style TVs. And it turned on and then flipped through a couple stations. And we tried with the remote to see if we could get it to go, if there was some kind of, whatever. And then a few years later, in the room next to that one, in that corner, a bigger room, and two couples were in there that were there for the Mothman Festival. They had a modern TV. It was the sound would keep going down, so they'd keep cranking it up, and then the sound would blast, and they'd turn it down again. Then all of a sudden, a pop can flew off the one of the dressers or whatever there. So all in that same corner of the motel is, so if I brought back some kind of ancient spirit from the TNT area, he stayed there and he's still flipping channels and didn't come home with me, which is a good thing. But that's it.
It is good.
Yeah.
I tell you.
Yeah. See, I would get a new hotel room. That's I'd stay at a new place.
Well, I haven't been there. It's a great place, by the way. I'll tell you guys. It's a clean, comfortable room, and they leave the light on for you. But it's not that particular brand. But I can't. A couple other minor things, but that's why. And I have been in the TNT area with people that are seeing and experiencing shadow people and having physical reactions and so forth. And me, I would take flesh-eating zombies to get a reaction out of me, I think.
Aww.
Do you think we could do the goo thing?
Yeah.
Yep. Tell them if we can do the goo. I bet we could help.
I kind of have this theory on just in general where everybody's surrounded by their own little electromagnetic field or goo, and each person, like each place that you visit and each thing that happens to you imprints on your goo, and then different people that you meet along the way, your goo is compatible and you get along and you just feel like, like with Barbara and I, we've always just known we were meant to be friends, and we've always just been attracted to each other in that way. So, I think everybody experiences that. And I've often wondered that if, like, people who have a thicker goo, if they experience more things when they're together, and then I kind of wonder if people who don't experience, like you, if you hung out with a few of us that do experience, if that would heighten your ability to experience.
I think it does. Bill Konkoleski, who runs Michigan MUFON, is an experiencer, and he's had many experiences. And he says that people that have spent time with him that were not experiencing anything started to pick up on things. So I think there's a lot to that. But I'm wondering if I get too much goo, if I just take a long shower with some Irish Spring or something, if I can remedy that.
Might need to take a salt bath.
Yeah, that would maybe a cleanse. Yeah. Alchemical cleanse.
Yeah.
Well, see, I really screwed up because I might have even had some missing time when I came back to the motel, and I'm looking at the clock and I'm thinking, oh, I didn't lose any time. And then I thought back, I didn't write anything down. So that was a learning experience for me, that if I were to have anything else happen, you really need to try to be aware and, document things so that you don't forget or you don't wonder what really happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting with you talking about the TNT area. I saw a episode of some show. I don't even remember what it was. But Chip Coffey went to
Paranormal
the TNT
State.
area. Yeah, went to the TNT area.
And I want to say my friend John Frick you see him very briefly in
Yeah.
that episode. And several months later, they had an event there in February 2009 called Return to Mothman. So I was there with Chip Coffey and the Paranormal State crew. It was a great time, but please go on with your story.
Yeah, no, watching him walk into the igloo,
Yes.
he looks around and he's like, no. And he walked out. I'm like, he gets me. And that was my...
You never see him do that.
Yeah,
except
that was my
that
tipping
episode.
point where I'm like, okay. Somebody else, I just watched someone have the same reaction where it's just no.
Remember, he said he picked up some kind of energy that he had never picked up before.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah. I was fortunate.
Yes, Morganna and I saw that too.
love to sit down with him sometime about that.
Oh, listen, he's a really great guy. I was fortunate. We went out there. They sent buses out with, we get to go out with a celebrity, So I went out with, Chip Coffey and, oh, come on, the young lady's name, just Heather Taddy. And
Yes,
so,
Heather.
and so we were out there, and he said the same thing. He's standing out in front of the igloo, and he says, I'm still picking up this strange energy that I've never felt before. And let me just tell you something else about him. There were a couple of other ladies there that were going to go out to for their particular time on the bus. And some other lady freaked him out. They said, "Oh, I don't want you to go out there. Demons will attach to you, and they'll." And they came from Waterford, Michigan, which is kind of west of Pontiac, and I would have told them that no self-respecting demon is going to go to Waterford, Michigan. But anyway, but they were freaked out, and they didn't go.
Yeah.
So John started talking to him, and then he told Chip Coffey about it, and he got a little bit perturbed that this lady laid all this fear on them. So he and John and I took those ladies out the next morning into the TNT area to show them that, there's nothing really to worry about here. Yeah. But he undertook that on himself, to kind of put those ladies at ease. So he's a good guy.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I really he had a camp or something where he was working with kids that I thought was pretty cool too.
Yeah.
That
I remember that.
Yeah, it was a show.
That was pretty entertaining.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of it, but that was pretty good. Let's see. The only other thing I wanted to say about the film, my first reaction was negative because I thought, oh heck, they didn't do enough of the book, and they didn't cover the Men in Black that much. And of course, the reason they didn't get heavily into the Men in Black was because I think you had the silly Men in Black movies preceding it. Mm-hmm. So, they had to step easily around that. But I don't know if you have the DVD, if you look at some of the extras, some of the scenes that were deleted, you can see how they were trying to get more aspects of the book in there. Remember how Keel talks about the lights changing, the visible light, and then going into the super spectrum and coming out of the spectrum.
Right.
Following the spectral, you know what
Order
I'm saying?
colors.
Yes, exactly. Well, they were going to do that in the film, but they never got that in the final cut. But now it's one of my favorite films. And also Richard Hatem, that wrote the screenplay, is interviewed on this Mothman Legacy, and he's really good. Yeah, it's really good. Let's see. What's our time doing? I wanted to let you guys talk a little bit about some of your experiences as well. I always enjoyed some of Keel's catchphrases, if you will. Remember how he talks about ask the contactee what they had for breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, what he means is what you were talking about. You find out that they've had strange phone calls. They've they maybe have seen some kind of a cryptid or whatever. I talked to a lady that in New Hampshire that had missing time, and she contacted me on Facebook, and I asked her a series of John Keel questions, and it turned out she was one of these people that had all kinds of things, shadow people, orbs, and so forth. He was just so far ahead of his time. But anyway, would you guys like to talk a little bit about some of your experiences, because we haven't talked too much about that, and you spent a good deal of time of that on your original podcast.
Who wants to go?
I'd like to tell the story about when we were in that Zoom meeting.
Yes.
So, when we were talking about starting the podcast.
We had a planning meeting for the podcast.
Yes.
And I'm up in my office, which is where I do most of my work. And I got this little weird static on my computer, and it happened again. And then on the third time, it very distinctly said, "I can't help it." And I'm like, the heck?
She got a voice.
Yeah. I'm like, this is not okay. And we ended very shortly after, and I closed the computer and left the room. I'm like, all right, I'm done with that. So the next morning at 4:00 in the morning, our fire alarm goes off. for about 15 seconds and then turns off. And I'm like, okay, that's not okay. So I'm awake now. So I came back up into my office. I'm a seamstress, so I was going to do some sewing. And I set up a podcast on one of my little Bluetooth speakers, and I'm doing my thing. And then all of a sudden I hear this music coming from downstairs, and I'm like, huh. And I go downstairs. It's like, at this point, it's about 6 o'clock in the morning, and the TV has turned itself on, and it's on cartoons. And I'm like, what is happening? That was the whole thing. It was just that little burst, but it was the strangest thing. We've had the fire alarm do that now and again, where it'll go off for about 15 seconds and then stop. And sometimes, like, I've had the ceiling fan will kick on for like 2 or 3 turns and then turn off. And occasionally the TV will turn on and turn off. But it's never been accompanied by an EVP. So that was weird.
Yeah. And
go ahead.
We could hear the voice too.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah, I didn't like it.
And we all
nobody liked it.
Words.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and none of us liked any of it.
Maybe I don't envy your experiences there that much.
It's not always great. Sometimes it's really annoying.
This is I've never felt malice from it. It's always just like it's trying to get attention. And then one time I had just finished a blog post where I said the one titled, "Thank you, Mr. Criswell." As soon as I shut my computer, the fire alarm went off for 15 seconds. And I'm like, all right.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what's really weird is her fire alarm will go off and she won't tell me. And then, 3 counties away? We're 3 counties away, right? 3 or 4. And mine will go off for no reason.
Or mine will go off, and then theirs will go off in the next week.
You're not even safe in the next county, for crying out loud.
No, we're not.
I mean, Morganna and I are just across town from each other, so whatever, that happens. But Kendra is way the hell. Should I tell him about the ring?
Yeah.
Okay, so Kendra had surgery on her neck. What was it? A year ago? 2 years ago?
November 2 years ago.
No, okay, November 2 years ago, and she asked me to come and stay with her, and help keep an eye on her, and herd the kids around, and take them to school, and feed them dinner, and make sure everything was cool, because she really had to take it easy because she had this neck brace on, and she wasn't supposed to move, and all that stuff. And I'm like, yeah, cool, that's awesome. So, I came to stay, and helped out with everything. Didn't destroy the house. Tried to, but I
ran over a wall. But hey,
her daughter didn't know she had to wake me up before 5 minutes before it was time to take her to school. So that's okay. I hadn't had coffee anyway. I had a ring that I had on with me, and Kendra had seen it, so she knew what it looked like. And it came home with me, and, I wore it off and on at home. I don't know, three or 4 times. It's a pinky ring. And one day I was gathering my laundry, and the pinky ring slipped off my finger. It was silver and turquoise, and it's a very distinctive style, and it fell off my finger, and I heard it hit the floor. I have a hardwood floor. I'm like, okay. So I put the laundry in the basket, and I start looking for the ring, and I can't find the ring. And I'm like, okay, it's under the dresser. It's not under the dresser. And I'm like, okay, it slid under the bed. So I'm looking everywhere for this ring. And then I'm like, okay, it's in the laundry somewhere, even though I heard it hit the floor, with the very distinctive, metallic ching. And I'm like, okay. So, I did the laundry, and it was just gone. And, sometimes things disappear in my house, and that just happens. And I usually find them, and it's okay. Well, 3 months later?
Yeah.
3 months later, Kendra calls me, and she said, hey, well, you tell this part. Cause
I sent you the picture of it.
Yeah, so, that's right.
I had gone up into my office, and I had been in and out of the office several times at this point. But I go up into my office, and I'm looking down as I walk, and in the middle of the floor, like right in the walking path, is Barbara's ring. And I'm like, huh. So I take a picture of it, and I send it to her, and she replies, my ring. And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, you left it here. Duh.
Yeah.
Except
So,
I did.
Yeah.
And then I said, but you don't understand. I didn't leave it. I was like, I just lost it at my house.
Yeah.
And she was like, okay.
So what are you doing with the ring now?
It's still at my house.
Yeah.
Is
then
it buried in a vault in the sub basement
Yeah,
somewhere?
True. Well, and another weird thing that happened, so we played D&D with our kids, my husband and I, and at one point he bought the metal dice. Super cool. So my youngest dropped her D20 on the ground down in the dining room. We couldn't find it. It was gone. Like, looked all over the house, all over that area, couldn't find it. I don't know, 2 months later, I'm cleaning her room. I'm cleaning out under her bed, and stuffed in the back corner is that die. And we're like, and I asked the kids, I'm like, did you move it? And they're like, what? No animal could have gotten to where it was. We don't know how it got there. I think I just need to salt my house.
Wow.
You need a salt mine.
Mm-hmm.
Before we go on, Andy, what about you? When you delving into the unknown and the esoteric, did you ever have any weird stuff happen to you? Anybody you get strange phone calls or anything?
Are you kidding? You're asking me now?
Okay.
Hours.
Stay tuned for part 2 next week.
Much of it is induced, of course, by working ceremonial magic, so it intentionally occurs. So yes, absolutely. I'll tell briefly a little story I did of a similar kind of thing of something disappearing and then reappearing, and there's no way it could have been anything other than supernatural. Brief story. I used to repair vintage fountain pens, which I used to sell on in a shop. Many years ago this was, and one of the best glues for vintage fountain pens is a Copydex, because it slightly expands. You can fill small gaps and cracks. That's what you need to know about Copydex. It's a glue. Tub is about the size of, I don't know, an orange, shall we say. I use it in my little spare bedroom upstairs in the flat I used to live in with my partner then, now my wife, and the tub had gone missing. It just literally disappeared. We just couldn't find it anywhere. I thought, what the hell have I done with that? About 2 months later, coming home from work, you walk up the stairs, and it's amazing. I walk up the stairs to the bedrooms, and as you do, you see straight across on the corridor to the spare room, which used to be my office. There, on the floor, in the middle of the office, literally in the middle of the office, on the floor, was a Copydex tub. There is no way on earth it would have just been dropped there by me and disappear for 2 months to reappear in the middle of I had to go and buy more because I needed the stuff for what I was doing. And literally, it was just there in the middle of the floor. So that was rather strange, to say the least. Yeah, it's just mad to say. But, I mean, I do sort of stuff that can cause stuff to happen, which happen.
Yeah.
Stuff you kind of feel around you rather than sort of physically see. But, yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of strange experiences. I mean, I've been involved in sort of paranormal investigating for 30 years, so I've had quite a few experiences over the years.
I want to thank all of you, because now I don't have to blame my losing stuff all the time that I've just set down on my own absent-mindedness. I can blame it on my delving into the unusual and unknown. So okay, well, that's good. Are there any other experiences now? So some of the stuff happened when you were initially thinking about creating this podcast.
Oh yeah.
That's wild. Let me tell you one other quick TNT story. By the way, have you guys ever been to Point Pleasant Mothman Festival, the TNT area?
Not yet.
I haven't been to the festival, but I've been to Point Pleasant many times when I was a kid, and have been to the TNT area.
Well, I'll have to let you guys know that a lot of us we go down there every once in a while, a group of us. So we would love to have you come down and join the Mothman regular sometime. And
that would be fun.
I love that.
I have a pair of 3rd generation night vision goggles, which I used. my second time alone in the TNT area, I had to do this. I just had to. It's part of that. I never had a rite of passage when I was a young man, so this is my rite of passage as a middle-aged guy, right? So I went down in a mild January. There was no snow on the ground, and I decided I was going to go to Igloo Road number 7 on Potters Creek Road. That's the one. They were in. Chip Coffey was in the second igloo on that road. It's kind of one where a lot of people go and have had experiences. So I decided I was going to go into the first 3 igloos. I was playing Paranormal Investigator. I had my recorder running and my flashlight and my camera, and I had my night vision goggles. And it was very cool because you need some ambient light for the goggles to work. And there was almost a full moon above. So nice. It bathed the area in light where it actually looked like daylight as I was looking through the goggles. And if I lifted the goggles up to look at my equipment at all the darkness would filter in, and it would really be creepy. But I could see deep into the woods because there were no leaves. So I went into the first igloo, second igloo, did the filming, and I'm trying to get into the third igloo, which has a lot of brush on it, and I hear the flapping of wings, and I'm not kidding. And so, but then I was followed by, and excuse my rendition of this, rah, rah, rah. And so obviously it wasn't the Mothman. And I played, my wife is a bird watcher, so she's kind of adept to this sort of thing and knows about this sort of thing. And I played it for her, and she said it was just some kind of a heron. So I disturbed a sleeping heron by the igloo number 3. And that was, but it gave me pause for a minute. But he was right next to me, and I heard the flapping of the wings, but he didn't brush past me or anything. So I didn't have a heart attack, which was good.
Blue herons are really common in there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Could have also been a night heron too.
Which are a thing.
Yeah.
Those are.
Yeah. Well, I've seen them in the Hocking River, so yeah, it could well have been one of those.
Well, I didn't have any. The TV set behaved when I went back to my.
Well, that's good.
No repeats there. Let's see. Well, we're getting a little bit past an hour here. Let's do this. Are there any things we're going to get close to closing? And listen, would you guys come back sometime? Because as you know, we've just barely scratched the surface on this. Yeah, as you go on and you do more shows, and I don't know if you're planning on having guests or whatever, but the young lady Zelia Edgar is another Keelian, and she would be a great choice. But so is there? Are there any things you'd like to talk about before we start to wrap up?
I want to bring up a very small experience of mine that was super Keelian. And it was such a brief little thing.
Wait a minute, who's talking?
This is Morganna.
Okay, that's right. I got it down now. Morganna. I'm good now. So, yeah, it's that learning curve.
So I was staying at my boyfriend's house in an apartment building that was torn down recently, and I'm actually quite glad it was torn down because that apartment was strange. And we were up late, being early 20-somethings. And he sat up in bed and he said, "Do you hear that baby crying?" And I have my eyes like almost popping out of my head because what I'm hearing is that super loud beeps being blasted, and he's hearing it as a baby crying, and I'm hearing beep, beep, beep. Wow. Being like projected into his bedroom. And that bedroom was messed up anyway. That was the night terror bedroom. Yeah. We eventually moved the bed into the living room because neither of us could sleep in there anymore. We were having so many night terrors and so many hypnagogic hallucinations.
Well, listen, that's fascinating. That's a connection because for those that don't know, John Keel chronicled all kinds, even including I think Linda Scarberry, where she was living in her trailer. They were getting this weird beeping noise, I think, outside the trailer. But a common aspect of poltergeist phenomena is that baby crying where there is no baby. But you guys were hearing
two
at the same time two different things. I've never heard of that, and that's an important factor.
Yeah, I felt like he was hearing whatever it was wanted to project, which was the sound of a baby, and I was somehow hearing the pure signal.
Yes.
that was being projected somehow.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
That apartment was
she
so messed up.
she called me the next day and said, "Mom, listen to this. This is what happened." And I was like, "Oh, that's cool."
And I was
That's
like, yeah, it's
just
cool
like,
now that the sun's up.
well, okay, yeah. I can't, yeah.
It's not cool that night.
Truth.
Yeah, that's really, really fascinating. That's something that if you're going to write a book or an article or something like that, that really is an important piece. And if you'll allow me to quote that sometime,
Sure.
Joey Medea and I are slowly writing a book called Parallels and Patterns, a new paradigm for the examination of UFO paranormal phenomena, and that'd be perfect to include in it. So I will definitely write that up at some point then,
Yeah,
and of course
go ahead.
interview you a little more on it. What about anybody else like to add some final thoughts, and also if you want to add some final thoughts about Keel's legacy as well, whatever comes to mind.
Well, I would say, Keel and Valet, probably those two, have done more to really shape the new ways of thinking that are being shown in the paranormal research world today. I think that there are new ways of looking at UFOs. Valet himself says that what we're dealing with is a non-human intelligence that manifests itself in many different ways. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of new researchers who are really looking at every type of manifestation as being a possible link to this non-human intelligence. And I think that Keel and Valet, both of them, really, really, really helped shape the way that people think of these things.
I agree 100%. And there was a period of time, even after the film, when Keel's legacy was being lost. The Mothman Prophecies was stayed in print, but in more recent years, we've got a lot of articles that have been reprinted, which is great. But it was funny because there was a big event that it used to, I think was it Philadelphia or Pittsburgh every year with a lot of the ghost people, but they were promoting that John Keel was going to be there. And I think that was a scam. I don't think Keel ever even agreed to do it, but I got all excited and I was going to make the pilgrimage to go see him. But there's a well-known talk show host that still, I'm not going to mention who it is, but he's talking about, so-and-so is going to be there and so-and-so. And he said, and there's this UFO researcher that's going to be there. I'm sorry, I don't know his name. And I thought, you don't know John Keel. I live and breathe John Keel since I bought the Mothman, even before I bought the Mothman Prophecies hardcover with the dust jacket off the shelf, So I thought, and it's just that, and there were some people that were after he died that were bad mouthing him, and I thought, so there was a dark period there, but that's why I'm so glad that your podcast, The 6 Degrees of John Keel, is out there. There's that. There's other shows like mine and Zelia's, and I should say like ours and Zelia's, and sorry, Andy.
I'm still here.
Getting too full of myself sometimes.
It's your show. I do the editing. It's your show.
And Brent Raines just wrote that great book on John Keel. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with that one.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Dumb question. I'm sorry. I have to ask.
As soon as I saw it was coming out, I bought 4 copies, and gave a bunch away. So, yeah.
Well, I was privileged to introduce him at the Mothman Festival when he first promoted it. So that was very cool. I used to be the happy-go-lucky schlep that would go to the Mothman Festival, buy stuff, anything with Mothman on it, and go home with a grin on my face. And now I got so many duties that, my God, I have to pay attention,
You need a personal shopper.
Yeah, that's right.
That's exactly what you need.
Anybody else want to do any closing comments?
No, I don't know what I could add to any of that.
That's all
I
right.
think go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, don't you go ahead.
Oh, I I like that Keel kind of brought a lot of this to the forefront and in some ways made it okay to be an experiencer. And a lot of pioneers anywhere risk a lot by stepping forward and taking those first steps. And I appreciate those steps that he took so that the rest of us could follow.
Well, if you go back in history, look at all the attacks he received because he had the audacity to question the nuts and bolts aspect, or to think that ghosts could be connected to, entities and so forth. Nick Redfern in the Black Diary, he's talking about the Men in Black and how Keel saw that there's more than one type of Men in Black. And he said at the close of one of the chapters, John Keel was ahead of his time. And in whatever afterlife domain he is now, he probably still is. Are you guys familiar with David Paulides, the missing 411 guy?
Yes.
I saw
Morganna is our expert on missing 411 and cattle situations. So
we've got more to talk about next episode.
I'd love to come back.
Well, I hope you guys will. I hope you guys will be regular guests. And I saw him speak at in Pittsburgh one time, and he and Stan Gordon. You're familiar with his research, Bigfoot. Okay. And for those that don't know, he had Bigfoot and UFOs in Pennsylvania in 73, 74, and ever since. They were sitting talking to each other at these tables. And so we're all standing around listening. And at one point, David Paulides stops and he says, John Keel, he was ahead of his time, and I'm going, yes. Inside, I'm going, yes. I'm trying to maintain my composure.
Try to be cool.
And lastly, I was friends with Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who we lost last year. She wrote the great foreword to Brett Rain's book on John Keel, and she talked about how Keel was the one that saw put the entire thing together and how ahead of his time he was. So yes, I can't thank you guys enough for what the work you're doing. And
thank you.
What I want to do is thank Barbara. Yes, Kendra and Morganna.
Yay!
All right. Andy's going to be so proud of me. I really, seriously, I want to thank you guys for being on the show tonight because it was a real pleasure.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
And Andy, I'm glad you were here to enjoy this, even though we didn't let you talk very much.
We didn't let him get a word in.
No, I was just to sit back and listen, really. I mean, it's 5 of us on the call, so it's going to be quite a busy one. But absolutely fascinating stuff. I mean, it is. I came to my own conclusions about this kind of stuff. The Keel approach, if you like, independently of John Keel, it's for me, it's kind of going backwards almost to read somebody else saying similar kind of things. I mean, as you might have picked up there, I've been interested in the esoteric for most of my life, rather than sort of the kind of Keelian stuff, and also investigating paranormal stuff, proper ghost investigations. But my own experiences have led me to believe these things are all interconnected. And as I often say, for me, it depends on your own personal approach as to what it is you experience. These things don't have a form of their own. They just tap into what we see and feel. I mean, it's why things of elements of esoteric magic work the way it does. Things that would seem to be disconnected completely can still work simultaneously together. I mean, I have interest in things like what's called Enochian magic of Dr. John Dee, but also in runes and things like Islamic stave magic, and then the Kabbalah. These are all very different elements, but they all seem to work the way they're supposed to. And it's a question of what is it? There's something, for me, there's something underneath all of it that interconnects it all. So that was my approach, and that's what made sense to me. And then reading about Keel and talking to Steve, I thought that's definitely the right approach. That really works for me.
Yeah, Andy and I were on a show together where we found out we were both interested in in folklore and the connections to modern day UFO experiences. So that started our friendship off. And by the way, go ahead, Andy. I interrupted you.
There was a very strange noise just then. We were saying before about weird calls and dead air.
Oh, no, that's my dog.
I was about to say that's
just
Scotty.
my dog.
Damn, I spoiled it now. That was good.
I know. I'm so sorry. I got your hopes up.
That's good. Make sure you bring the dog back next time too, because we want the underscore. You know. Let's see. Oh, one thing I wanted in parting. Are you guys familiar with Alien Dawn by Colin Wilson? That's
I haven't read it. But
Okay,
I've heard of it.
It's a great book. Colin Wilson corresponded with John Keel a good deal. And in there he says that he writes that John Keel is incapable of writing a dull sentence. It's just excellent.
Absolutely true.
Yes, that's why I love him so much.
And then also in his book Mysteries, which is a huge book, but each chapter is kind of self-contained. And there's one chapter in there, I forget what it's entitled, but it talks about the work of Keel, Lethbridge, the dowser, T.C. Lethbridge, F.W. Holliday, the guy that investigated Loch Ness and decided that Loch Ness was probably more of a psychic phenomena, and some other people. But it's just fascinating the way he pulls everything together. So I highly recommend those books as you're pursuing John Keel.
Thank you.
Excellent.
So let me thank you again, and I'll do my my famous closeout here. It's not really very famous, but I'm going to close out anyway. All right. And by the way, tell us again how to find your podcast.
6degreesofjohnkeel.com. It's 6 as a numeral and the rest of it spelled out. Or you can go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Stitcher. Or you can look us up on Facebook at 6DJK Podcast.
Again, Barbara, Morganna, and Kendra.
Yes.
Thank you very much for being here tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.
And sit tight for just a minute. We'll talk after the show for just a second. The High Strangeness Factor was created by Steve Ward and Andy Mercer and is copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I want to thank our fearless leaders here at the network, Irene Allen Block and Mark Johnson. I also want to thank Andy in his role as producer and Brian Zeller for the original theme music for the show. I can also be heard as a correspondent on Mac Maloney's Military X-Files weekly on the same network and many other networks. And I am Steve Ward, your humble host here on the High Strangeness Factor, a displaced yank here on Paranormal UK Radio. Thank you for listening. I will see you all again in a fortnight. Take care.